good to see familiar faces and names and also new friends.
All right, as people join, I'm going to go ahead and share our screen.
Thanks for all the hellos, the waves, the notes in the chat. It's good to see you all. We'll give people a couple more minutes to arrive. Sarah's working on getting the PowerPoint up so y'all can see it. We did have a few slides to guide us through, so when she gets that up and after we give people another minute or two to join, then we'll get started. I'm not letting you share.
Well, no, it doesn't seem to be. So let me try a different way.
Yeah, while we're waiting, if people want to put in the chat, I see some people are putting a couple of greetings. If people want to shout out, share which college you're at, whether you're a student or staff, that might be a fun way to do some introductions since we're not going to be able to go around the room like we usually do when we're together.
All right, was that successful? Are you all seeing?
Okay. Yeah, we can see
Marvelous.
it. We can see the sidebar too of what's coming up, but that is totally fine. Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, great. I'm so glad everyone's shouting out, saying hello, sharing their institution. So keep doing that. And I'm gonna jump in and go ahead and get us started. So welcome. We're really excited that y'all are here today in the session that we titled You Can't Vote by Zoom. We're looking forward to spending the next hour or so together sharing ideas about empowerment of our college student voters. My name is Ashley Cochrane, and I get to co-present today with my colleague, Sarah Rohrer. We work at Berea College in Berea, Kentucky. We both work at CELTS, which is the Center for Excellence and Learning Through Service. We call it CELTS for short, and we're the home for student community engagement at Berea College. Our work includes co-curricular student engagement, including a Bonner Scholars Program and student-led community service. And we also support academic service learning and other forms of community engaged teaching and scholarships. We work with faculty and courses as well. Wanted to tell you a little bit about where we're located. Berea is in Berea, Kentucky. We're a semi-rural community. We are a small town of about 15,000 people, and we're located right on the edge of the Kentucky Bluegrass and the Appalachian Mountains. We're about an hour away from the closest city, which is Lexington, and we're about 2 hours away from larger metropolitan areas like Knoxville, Cincinnati, and Louisville. I'm gonna hand it off to Sarah to go over our agenda for today.
Oh, thanks, Ashley. So our focus today really is to be hearing from one another. We are engaged as a center with a coalition focused on voter empowerment. So that's interesting and of course timely work generally. But, and so we want to share kind of what has brought us to this point, a little bit of recent history of that group. But then we want to talk about what does voter empowerment and preparation look like now? And I say that in light of COVID and new voting strategies and regulations, but also in light of Black Lives Matter and all of the policy implications that are wrapped up in the demands of the Black Lives Matter movement and all of our kind of heightened awareness that we're experiencing as a nation. So the bulk of our day today, we're really focused on doing the breakout groups and having these small group discussions so that we can share, what are you thinking? What are the specific barriers that you encounter? What are strategies you have used in the past or are hoping to use? Things like that, so that we can learn from one another. So in the chat, we'll be sharing a Google Doc link in the hopes that each breakout group will share whatever notes and whatever ideas that come out of their breakout groups so that we can create a cohesive document that everyone's able to draw from moving forward, that maybe that can be a starting place for us. We really, our goal is that we would end today not only talking about potential barriers, but also potential strategies and solutions, especially those that are really specific to this time we're in now.
Great. So we wanted to start by sharing a little bit about the work that we've been doing at Berea College. In the summer of 2017, folks from across campus came together to form what we called VEPAC, which stands for the Voter Empowerment and Political Awareness Coalition. What we had identified was that while there was voter empowerment work happening in various places across campus, we weren't coordinated. We weren't communicating enough with each other and we weren't coordinating our efforts. And so our hope was that by coming together and increasing that communication and coordination, we'd be able to have a greater impact and see more effective results in terms of student engagement with voting and political activities. So VEPAC and the coordinating committee includes students and staff from CELTS, from our center, students and staff from Student Life, student representation from SGA, or the Student Government Association, and it also includes involvement and leadership from some faculty who focus on civic engagement in their teaching, as well as collaborations with other centers and programs and faculty across campus, and some collaborations with some of our community partner organizations. Specifically, we've worked with a local grassroots membership-based and issue-focused organization called Kentuckians for the Commonwealth that many of you are probably already familiar with, as well as some collaborations with our local Human Rights Commission. So early on in VEPAC, we identified that our goals were to increase student voter registration and student turnout at the polls. But also that one of our goals was to focus on helping students to develop civic engagement skills. So the skills of dialogue about the issues that students are passionate about, and skills of communicating with elected officials and in the effort to hold elected officials accountable. So that means that a lot of the activities of VEPAC are focused, as you can see, on the election cycle, focused on voter registration, focused on educating students about candidates and issues, and then, the on the ground work of getting students out to the polls on election day. But some of our activities also do focus on education and skill building. So for example, we've had issue focus days on, for example, DACA. We had a day where students could come to a central location and work together to write letters, make phone calls, learn to articulate their views on that issue, learn about the issue. And we've also had trainings on other skills like voter rights. So part of our focus is on recognizing that every student can be involved in the political process, whether they are actually eligible to vote or not. Here's a view from one of the candidate forums that we hosted in collaboration with our community-based partner, KFTC. And so it was a candidate forum that was completely hosted and run by students on campus, but community members were invited, and we did have a lot of community members come as well. So just another example of one of the activities that we've hosted on campus. I'll hand it back to Sarah.
So we know that we have, as a community of college age focused folks, we have some common barriers across all of our institutions, arguably. This kind of basic how-to questions about how do I engage, how do I register to vote, how do I decide where to register to vote, concerns about turnout, about being convinced that people's voices are being heard. That list, I'm sure you could help us add to pretty quickly. And I say this not to say there's not value in exploring those common barriers, but what we've found is that maybe the most fruitful conversation comes when we dive a little bit deeper beyond those common barriers into those that are really specific to our areas, or specific insofar as they also call for specific strategies or solutions. Our hope is that when we break out, we'll explore some of those more and be able to find connections and maybe campuses with whom we'd like to follow up after this session today to build even more strategies.
Great.
Yeah.
So in just a moment, we're gonna break into breakout rooms so that you all can share more with each other about some of the specific barriers that are unique perhaps to, or maybe especially relevant at your particular institution or in your community. So to lead into that, we'll share a little bit about some of the barriers that we've been really focused on at Berea College, barriers to student voting. So the first one I'll share about is that we have a relatively small centralized campus. Our student body is around 1,600 students. And even though we're in this small campus, our campus is divided into 4 different voting precincts. And those voting precincts exist at 2 different polling locations. So a student could, in their 4 years at Berea College, around 4 years, they could be voting in a different voting precinct from year to year, depending on which residence hall they live in, or if they move off campus. And so what we find is that amount of confusion or uncertainty about whether they're registered at the correct location or which van they should get on election day to ride to the polls, which precinct which polling location am I going to, what's going to be on my ballot, because my ballot might look different to yours if I'm in a different voting precinct. That confusion can be a deterrent. The second barrier that has been a focus here at Berea is that the political polarization that we're seeing in our country affects each of our communities, and that's certainly true here in Berea as well. And at Berea, we do have a history of some community members advocating that Berea College students should not be able to vote in Berea. Students have encountered discouragement and even intimidation to registering to vote and voting in Berea. And occasionally at the polls have encountered inaccurate information or confusing information. And those kinds of experiences can also be intimidating or a deterrent to voters. And finally, at Berea College, one of the admissions requirements to Berea is that every student comes from a family with limited financial means. And we know that statistically, US voters who have higher incomes are statistically more likely to vote. So voters in higher incomes vote at higher rates than voters who have lower incomes. And so when we combine that information, we can surmise that some Berea College students may come from communities or families that don't have a strong tradition or a strong history of voting. And so that can be another barrier potentially to overcome. So those are some of the specific barriers at Berea. We're excited for y'all to share some of the barriers that you face in your community. Sarah's gonna break us into rooms, and when we go into those rooms, we'd like for you to talk both about barriers that are really significant in your community, in your institution to student voting, and also talk a little bit about some of the barriers that you think might be new or different based on the fact that we are currently living through a global pandemic.
And just a note, I put those questions in the chat box in case you wanted to reference those while you're in your breakout session. I've also put the link to the Google Doc. So if you come up with things or as you brainstorm, if someone would be willing to add notes, both in this breakout session and the next one, we'd be grateful, because then we'll kind of create some themes and share it broadly. So let me work out this breakout situation and we will be all set.
And I think we're going to give you about 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. Sarah, 10 minutes?
15 yeah, minutes? About 10 minutes for this person.
Okay, about 10 minutes to share. And then when we come back together, we'd love to hear from some of you about themes that or significant things that stood out in your discussion.
All right, and here we go.
See you soon.
I think we've got a couple groups that are taking their very last seconds, and we'll get started in just a moment.
Great, well, it looks like everybody, or just about everybody, is back. I hope y'all had some good conversations. We want to take a few minutes now to hear back from some of you about maybe themes that stood out during your breakout groups or just interesting things that you covered in your group. You're welcome to unmute yourself and chime into the conversation. And you can also continue to use the chat if you want to add some additional comments there. And also keep adding to that Google Doc if you have ideas that you want to make sure we capture. So what were some of the things that stood out in your breakout conversations?
I would say one thing that stood out in our breakout conversation, Davidson College, but we talked about how different the voting systems were in every state, and how that was a really inefficient system for voting because it makes it very confusing and a lot harder to vote. Like, for example, in Kentucky, it's a closed voting state, so you have to register as a Democrat or a Republican to vote there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, in Kentucky, to vote in the primaries, you have to be registered with a political party. And another thing that we found in preparing for this, or that we thought about as we prepared for this presentation, is that voter ID laws are very different from state to state. So that can definitely be another confusing challenge if you're from one state, you move to another state for college, trying to make sure that you're following whatever the guidelines or the laws are in that state. Thanks for adding that in.
And we talked some about helping navigate the question of whether students vote in their home districts or try to re-register at the college, because it's certainly more convenient to vote and at the college, and that's a nice thing. So many of them, the first year students, they've never voted before. So one of the things we encountered this year is in Tennessee anyway, you may not cast your first vote absentee. So you need to vote, at least in a local election, after you turn 18 before you can vote do an absentee ballot. So, but it was just, but then someone raised the issue of maybe it's better to vote, to encourage students this year to vote in their home districts, even if they have to take a day off school and go home. Because if colleges need to shut down because of COVID, you don't want them all registered at school and then not be there to vote. So it's just all very complicated around where to register.
What are some of the factors that people have considered as they made that decision? Should I register to vote at my permanent address, or should I register to vote in my college community?
So Ashley, so this is Bernadette. I'm from Wagner College in Staten Island, and I actually brought up this issue because we've been working with our provost, who has been part of the Board of Election, and he had been advising us not to encourage students to register in Staten Island because Staten Island is a swing district. And so that could be the case if we have a lot of student voter turnout, that their votes will be challenged, even though they are legally allowed to vote in Staten Island. And that's the reason why we have been pushing them all along for the previous years not to register in Staten Island, because we don't want them to have that experience. It becomes much more challenging around the absentee ballots, which I 100% agree with everyone. But that has been our approach, to stress the fact that that's the reason why we are doing it.
Thanks, Bernadette. Any other comments on that particular topic, or other things that stood out in your group conversations?
Yeah, I just had a question about the person who was talking about the Staten Island thing. So have you experienced it before, where students end up voting in large amounts and then do they not count the students' votes, or what ends up happening?
So I've only been for 6 years at Wagner College, but that this is what the provost has told me, to basically that this could be happening, and especially in an election today. It hasn't happened before, but Staten Island has reliably voted Republican, but it swung the last time we I don't live there, but they elected Max Rose, who's a Democrat, and that was a narrow election victory. So with given everything that's happening right now, this is the reason we are basing this on assumptions. It hasn't happened in the past, but I think the 2020 election, everything that we have been reading from accusations of mail voting fraud, that's the reason why we've been pushing it. And in addition to that, and I mentioned this before, and I'll just add this right now. So I have 200 voter notifications like sitting here, where I need to notify the students that they rushed off of campus but didn't basically change the voting registration. So that's why we are also pushing more for the home address, if that's a possibility. At the same time, I'm also aware that some students do not have homes. So I will think that we need to be very careful how we address that. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much.
I was just gonna say, I work at DePaul with a W in Indiana. We have students from all over the country, and a lot of them just prefer to vote in their home state or city. So getting students to register in Putnam County is not often what happens. And then there are so many barriers with absentee ballot voting that even if we talk to a student, they're like, yeah, I'm already registered to vote back home. And then follow-up question, do you know how to vote absentee? They're like, I'll figure it out. And they don't want, or they don't have stamps. And there's just like all those barriers to how do you, like supporting students from we have like students from 48 states. They all have different rules in regard to voting absentee and different timelines where things have to get sent in, especially when the primaries are happening this spring. So that's one of our biggest barriers when we think about our students voting, because we can't like force them to vote in Putnam County.
I'm going to pause us here just because I think arguably any one of these elements we could spend a couple hours on, but I do want to make sure that we get a move ahead a little bit. But if you have other areas where you'd like to connect with people, please use the Google Doc to potentially call that out. I want to invite us just to look for a moment at, go take care of it, okay? 3-year-old interruption. I want to turn our attention to Berea College, or to strategies and solutions. So Ashley and I brainstormed just a handful of those that we have tried to get us started in thinking in this direction. So you see them there on your screen. For example, we do have a strong international student contingent and some people who aren't of age and presumably students who might not be able to vote for other reasons. And we do try to make sure that our voter empowerment work speaks to the power of the student and not simply the power of the citizen, that a lot of this education, get out the vote, paving the way for good education and knowledge and dialogue, that is not limited to those who can cast a vote. So trying to be really mindful about that. We have also just been pretty blatantly transparent about saying, you know, here at Berea College, no one's coming from a high income background. And that means that as a whole student body population, often that voice is not represented to the degree that we see other socioeconomic stratas recognized in our voting constituents. So just being really transparent to say, if you've got something to say about policy, which we know you do, you know, this is an opportunity that's not been taken advantage of enough. We've also tried to do a lot of voter rights training, and specifically we focused on kind of the shuttle drivers, making sure that we have volunteers who will get people to those various polling stations that they might have, but also making sure that those shuttle drivers know what are the rules. Does everybody in my van have the IDs that they need? Do they understand where they're going? Do they understand that I will get out of the van and come in with them if somebody says, oh no, you can't cast a vote here, when we've in fact supported them in checking that, yes, they're registered to vote, yes, this is where they should be, and things like that. Because frankly, it's really hard to push back with an election official if it's your first voting experience and someone tells you you can't vote. It's really helpful to have somebody simply with you to say, you know, help me understand this. Let's find that provisional ballot and figure this out. So those are just a few examples that we've done over here. Now I think I'm passing it off to Ashley.
Great. So we want to jump back into the breakout rooms, and hopefully here is the space where we can really dig in and start to learn from each other and share some ideas that we can perhaps implement in our own institutions. So Sarah's going to break us back out into rooms. The questions we'd like you to focus on are to share a strategy that you've implemented and do some reflection about what worked, what didn't work, what would you do differently. And also let's, I think naturally we're going to focus some attention on how does our current climate, both with the changes in how we're voting because of being in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, how does that impact our strategies for encouraging student voter engagement? And how is this moment that we're in right now with an increased focus on systemic racism in our country, how might that be another influence on how we approach encouraging students to use their voices in this particular way by voting? So Sarah's going to break us out, spend some time sharing strategies with each other, and then we'll come back together and share what we learned. Also, don't forget the Google Doc, add your ideas there, and we'll see you in about 15 minutes, I think. We're going to take a little longer for this discussion.
Yep, here we go. All right. breakout rooms will close in 1 second.
All right.
Okay. Well, it looks like we kicked everybody back into the big session.
Welcome back, everybody. So we are scheduled for the session to go until 2:30. We are planning to continue the conversation until we can, as long as we can, which is until 2:45, I think. And I'm sure Liz will pipe in and tell us if that's wrong. That's okay. Thumbs up from Liz. Okay, so we're going to keep the conversation going after 2:30. But if you need to leave, go ahead and hop off. I wanted to remind you that there is the Google Doc where you can add your ideas, both of strategies you've used and of organizations, national networks that have helped you in your voter empowerment work. You can also add those ideas in the chat, and we'll make sure to transfer them over to the Google Doc at the end of the session and get that back to you. So I'm saying that now so that as we jump into the conversation, you all can be adding those ideas so we capture them and don't lose them. And so now we would love to hear from some of you. What were some of the things that stood out in your conversations about strategies you've tried and strategies you're thinking about trying this year? And you're welcome to unmute yourselves and jump right in.
Well, one of the ones that we talked about, I think Burnett mentioned that they do this.
Cam's talking, but we cannot hear you, Cam.
Is it muted now?
Yeah, there you go.
You're good.
Now we got you.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right,
Thanks, Cam.
one of the things that Burnett was saying that I think Stanford does is that they, before class registration, that you were prompted if you wanted to vote or not. That way, you know, all your student body gets the option to register to vote right then and there. And then, you know, it's kind of like a moment where you're thinking, am I actually registered to vote? And I thought that was a pretty good thing that, you know, it'd be kind of easy to do and kind of hands off for people to do. You just had to take a few IT works and a few extra clicks for students, but I feel like that would be very beneficial.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think those ideas about how to put the question of, are you registered? Do you want to register in front of students again and again? That's a great strategy. Thanks, Cam.
We also have some ideas coming up in the chat about making voting a family event, or having students hold each other accountable to vote, and having questionnaires to students to see if they're registered and if they voted. Also a call out for turbo vote.
The turbo, I only mentioned that the turbo vote is where you can find the strategy that Stanford, Cameron just mentioned that where you can get that information, and they showed the numbers. The numbers are just, they jumped up so much higher. We don't know if that's gonna necessarily turn out to voter turnout, but the numbers makes you envious. That just, yeah, it made my day seeing those numbers like a few hours ago.
One idea that we did at Earlham when I was a student that I think I got from an SLI, I can't remember. We did an absentee ballot party where I think it was like a week before the deadline to submit absentee ballots. We invited all students that were doing an absentee ballot to come to a place on campus and ask questions, fill out their ballots together, kind of just like, and then we gave out I voted stickers, because when you fill out an absentee ballot, you don't get a sticker. So we gave them out, and we kind of made it like a celebration. And then we invited local candidates from around to come and talk, and it was a lot of fun, lots of food.
That's a great idea. I think we were talking about how I think all of us are going to be doing more absentee voting this year. So it's great to be thinking about how can we build energy around that, make it fun and celebratory still. Thanks, Sophia. What are some of the specific strategies you all talked about, maybe in light of our current changes in how we vote due to the pandemic?
there was one thing that I thought about, but that I didn't necessarily talk about. With everything that's going on, and since the fact that everyone usually doesn't have access to the internet or a way to get online, why isn't there a way that we can vote online? Or why is that? That would be a more efficient and effective way to get accurate voting in the States. So I feel like that's something that we should be voting in our local elections to get pushed to change.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of people are asking questions like that now about why are there not more ways to make voting easier? Why are there so many things in place to make voting difficult? And that's another question, I think, along those same lines. How can we make voting more accessible and easier?
Yeah, something else that came up in our group was there are some platforms, I believe TurboVote is one of those that does this, but if you register to vote or get people to register to vote through that platform, the platform will then continue to send like text updates and reminders and notifications. So then people are, getting information directly to their phone on a somewhat consistent basis, which is nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Liz. We found that that's one of the helpful features of TurboVote, that it also is when you register through them or you tell them where you're registered, they give you very specific information. So if I'm registered to vote in Virginia, even though I go to college in Kentucky, they're going to give me information about where I'm registered to vote. There's a primary election coming up, or this is the deadline for requesting your absentee ballot. So that's been a helpful feature of TurboVote for sure. One of the new strategies that we're planning for this summer that is reflective of where we are with distance learning is that the Berea College orientation events that are usually in person for incoming students in the summer are going to be online. And so we're working with our colleagues who plan those orientations to be able to include information in some of those online Zoom orientation events about registering to vote. And so we're actually kind of hopeful that that might be a way, kind of like what Cam was talking about earlier, to just put it in front of students in a way that they're kind of a captive audience.
Another idea that we did at Earlham is we created a student organization that was all about voter registration. So we were like any other student club or student organization on campus. So we had access to some funding that those groups have. We were like a student body of volunteers, so people like kind of recognized us. And if we do that at Center this coming year, one thing that they have in mind for online is having student orgs are still going to be happening if we are online in the fall, but having like a student org Zoom fair, they call it Expo, and it's like you go and see all the other student clubs that you sign up for, get on their mailing list.
Mm-hmm.
But having students represent the student org of voting at that virtual event, so they can see other students that are passionate about these issues and wanting to volunteer.
Great, thank you.
I just put a link in the chat for a site called votesaveamerica.com. It's actually pretty fun. So what you can do is, and I figured people could do this like at your institution, like with your students, or encourage students to do this, but you basically adopt a state. And so I think it's like 6 or 7 of the swing states. And then you're like on that team. So you'd be like team Florida, and you would get involved in helping Florida's election. So maybe you're making phone calls or helping other people get registered. So it's now off of like you just as your individual, like getting you to register, but helping states that matter, some of the states that matter the most, to get those people in those states registered. So I think it's pretty neat. So it could be fun to like do that as a campaign at your college, have people sign up to adopt a state. So I think that's fun. I thought it was a really cool idea.
Liz, is it bipartisan, or is this, because that's so while I clearly lean in one direction, I still process the other voter registration, but what you just shared, is it a bipartisan website? Because that I think is going to be a challenge for some of us to promote. I like the idea, but do you know a little bit more about the website?
I'm not sure if the website itself is bipartisan, but you could obviously just take the idea of like adopting a state, getting people registered in that state, and make the idea bipartisan. Does that make sense?
Okay. I think it also will then show once again to some students that some of their votes doesn't matter. And we know that in local elections, the votes matter. I think it needs to be collaborated with the other efforts at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure.
Great, thanks. I'm going to look at some of the suggestions that we've gotten in the chat as well and draw some attention to them. Caroline reminded us about the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, NSLVE, that provides our colleges with data about our student registration, student voting rates. Caroline, is there anything more you want to say about that and how you've used that?
Yeah, about how, since it shows voting trends among your students, who's registered versus who actually went to the polls, that you can use it to spur more student engagement, like beat last year's election, we do it. So, using it for students that way, but then also really talking, like our issue too is the faculty and staff don't necessarily know all the rules around voter registration on our campus. And a lot of myths have been spread by members of our campus as a whole. So like getting that information out to faculty and staff and figuring out ways that they can use it in their coursework, maybe giving them a lesson plan, something like that, that they can spend part of their class doing might be helpful. And then, now COVID, figuring out how to an online platform would be helpful.
Great, thank you. Rita gave some suggestions about how she's used social media, specifically an Instagram account, to promote voter registration. And Bernadette shared votewithme.us, helps us to reach out to our friends to remind them to vote.
And all of these sites will add to the Google Doc, and since you were able to participate, we'll send them out so you don't have to feel like you need to do a mad dash to collect them.
Great. Anything else that stood out that you would like to share before we move toward wrapping up? Great. Well, Sarah, I'll hand it off to you to
All right. Well, like I say, we'll get the list of participants and we'll send you this Google Doc. It'll also be available on the Bonner Learning Community in case it's a helpful resource. I did want to just do a shout out to Campus Engagement Election Project. I only found it in researching, just in the past week, but it has some nice pre-made, especially social media posts, reasons for engagement, ways to respond to common pushback about not getting registered to vote. So especially if you don't have a lot of capacity, but still an interest, they've got a lot of things already created for you. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time. I hope those breakout sessions were helpful. We are always grateful for an opportunity to have conversations with each other. Oh, and Caroline says there's swag too, so that's good. Also give out money. Okay, maybe not that.
Give you money so that you can buy stuff. Don't underestimate that.
Which one is that? Is that campus?
Yep.
CEEP?
Yes.
Oh, good. All right.
Thank you. Even better. Yeah. Budgets. All right. Thanks y'all so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your SLI experience.
Good to see everyone. Thank you.